My staff would be so proud of me right now because I tend to move around a lot when we have meetings and different things. But I'll just do what I normally do with some of our rethinkers. And I usually say, if you feel me, say, "Aye." Aye. And don't pronounce it correctly for all of you academics. So it's not all right, it's "aye." All right? So if you feel me, say "aye." Aye. All right, I'm going to jump in. I'll give you a little bit of history of Kids Rethink New Orleans schools. Talk a little bit about what some of our youth are doing right now and what we're doing in the world of youth organizing in New Orleans. I wanted to bring at least 2 of our young people today, but this week is our state testing, although I had no shortage of young people that volunteered to come anyway. This week is our state testing, so we couldn't bring anybody. So I'm going to try my best to represent. Kids Rethink New Orleans Schools is a youth organizing and youth leadership development organization that supports youth becoming thoughtful and capable leaders. And it's really through the analysis of their own educational experience. We started in 2006, and it was really born out of crisis. It was post-Hurricane Katrina, when a lot of folks from New Orleans were scattered throughout the United States, including a lot of our youth. And our founders, our incredible founders, Jane Woley and Betty Burks, 2 community organizers rooted in New Orleans, sort of came up with the idea of Rethink. And so when they returned to New Orleans in 2006, the summer of 2006, it actually started as just a one-time summer program. It was really an effort to bring together youth who would come back to New Orleans and make sure these young people had a voice in the rebuilding of New Orleans schools. And I'd say it was twofold. It was not only making sure young people had a voice in rebuilding the schools, but also providing a space for them to talk about their experiences that were brought on by Katrina and everything that had happened to them since they had moved and moved back. So that first summer we started with 20 youth. It was all middle schoolers. It was 20 youth. And as they began to talk about, really started what's germane to Rethink and how we do our process, the visioning process in terms of dreaming about the kind of schools they wanted to have. It was really the young people that said, we don't want to be done with this at the end of the summer. And you'll notice a pattern of the young people really pushing Rethink towards where it's headed. So they said, we don't want to be done with this. And that's how we started our school year programs. And really, that's how we became sort of a full year-round program and eventually became a 501c3 nonprofit organization. It's also the students themselves that called themselves Rethinkers. That's how the organization got its name, that the students called themselves Rethinkers. So one of the first initiatives of these 20 young people was addressing, number one was school food. And it's interesting because sometimes when our Rethinkers talk about food, and we still have a food initiative, healthy food initiative and food justice initiative at Rethink, a lot of people, I mean, I don't know anybody who's ever liked their school food ever. Like, so whether it was middle school, high school, college, everybody complains about school food. So it's really being able to put it in context for folks to understand why, in particular, Rethinkers were not only talking about school food, but they were talking about just the state of the schools in general that they were coming back to. A lot of the school food providers that had provided food for New Orleans prior to Katrina, for more kind of business and capital reasons, decided not to come back. And so when we say, or when our young people say, the food was unrecognizable, I need you to understand that the food was like absolutely unrecognizable. There are things that were being served, nobody knew what it was. It was crazy. And New Orleans being a food city, I mean, so many people identify New Orleans with food, so not just the restaurants, but part of the culture of New Orleans is food, is a huge part of the culture. How you eat it, who you eat it with, what you're doing when you're eating it, so much is a part of food that became one of the major sort of sticking points for our young people. And I don't know if I said that the first 20 were middle school, so we started off as mainly sort of youth organizing nonprofit that was mainly working with middle schoolers, so it was 6th to 8th graders. And so their push when they started sort of dreaming what would be a better system in terms of access, in terms of food being served at schools, was students were saying, like, first of all, we want to know what it is. That was pretty easy. Secondly, we really, I mean, New Orleans is such a rich place in terms of food and food culture that we want fresh local food to be served in our cafeterias. And that became one of the major pushes and also one of the major victories, first victories for Rethink and for these Rethinkers, was that they got Aramark food provider, school food provider, to agree to serve fresh local food in the cafeterias twice a week. And that was huge. I mean, when you talk about some of the Rethinkers, like after Aramark agreed to do it, they were like, oh my gosh, like, we did this. I didn't even know this was going to happen. So I think from then on, it provided a momentum not only for the young people that were a part of that entire sort of push, but for Rethink in general to continue to move forward. Another one of the earliest victories for these 20 young people that started were they got the Recovery School District to agree to repair 350 substandard bathrooms in all of the schools, which was huge. So the physical state of some of the schools pre-Katrina was already sort of, a lot of schools were in disrepair. And a lot of it had to do with kind of disinvestment in public schools prior to Katrina. So a lot of the schools were in disrepair. And then coming back, I mean, they were even in more disrepair. And students had the opportunity to attend schools in different parts of the country. And a lot of it was like, wait a minute, what? Like, I didn't know you could, like, use the bathroom when you went to school. I mean, it was like stuff like that. Like, how come we can't do this at our schools in New Orleans? So that became a huge push and a huge impetus for the repairing 350 substandard bathrooms. They got hand washing sinks installed in all school cafeterias. It was like just as easy as just, we want to be able to wash our hands and make sure, and we want the school providers to wash their hands before they're serving us food. So again, some of our earliest victories were around school food. As we began to grow, we now have high schoolers who are part of Rethink. And again, it was like our young people saying, I know we're no longer in middle school, but I kind of don't want to stop being a Rethinker. So we had to sort of think about expanding what it is that we do to include high schoolers. And like I said, you'll see a constant sort of theme here when Rethinkers are talking about this and how it shapes how we grow. So right now we have a middle school component and we have a high school component. You start off in Rethink, ideally through our summer program. It is a 6-week summer program that is arts-based, and that's where we really try to do some of the foundational things that has to do with youth advocacy and youth organizing. We really try to build those foundational skills over the summer program, and it helps to sort of bring us through what we consider as Rethink our leadership model in our organizing model. So number one, over the summer program, we do a lot of exploring of individual and collective identity. A lot of what we want to do with Rethink is all of the youth coming together and collectively identifying an issue, collectively researching an issue, collectively understanding and kind of deconstructing and doing a critical analysis of the issue. And we think it really needs to start with sort of exploring individual and collective identities so that the biggest piece is so that, like, as youth begin to understand struggles that take place in their own lives and that relate to their own identities, they could connect these struggles to what's going on in a larger community. And that's huge for us. We think if you don't understand who you are, not just as an individual, but collectively as we're sitting here in the room, it's going to be hard for us to address certain things that are going on. So that's the first thing that we do over the summer. The second thing that we do is explore historical narratives of oppression, of injustice, and not just stay there, because I think a lot of justice-related organizations sometimes stay there so you can get in a place where you're like, man, everybody's out to get us all the time, you know, and it's just you're always kind of in that mode. But so not only do we talk about historical narratives of oppression and injustice, but historical narratives of resistance, and particularly local resistance, and particularly youth resistance, and particularly people of color, because there is a strong narrative, even with like civil rights movement and what have you, there's a strong current narrative of people of color in the South just kind of laying back and taking everything that's happening, or youth in the South kind of just laying back and taking what's happening, and marginalized communities just laying back and taking what's happening. So we consistently sort of unearth some of those narratives so that we can say it's possible for you to be a part of this legacy as well. Even as we talk about those narratives, we kind of break it down into four clear narratives. Number one is we go through stock stories, which is just essentially the things that the story that everybody is told as to how things work in the world. The story everybody is told as to how you become successful. The story everybody is told as to how you are identified as a quote-unquote good person. These are stock stories, and we're sort of fed the idea that it happens the same way for everybody. And we kind of identify those stock stories and begin to break them down. And then we identify concealed stories, which is usually the true lived experiences of those folks who are on the margins, and they're usually completely opposite of stock stories. And what we try to do, even with the concealed stories, is say our lived experiences is not just a negative thing that happens to us all the time, but it's also great things that come out of our community that nobody acknowledges because people don't acknowledge our concealed story. And we think that's so important, especially for young people of color that we work with. It's so important for us to unearth that, to say that, man, I mean, what we do is incredible and nobody will ever get it or understand it because they don't see us in sort of 3D sometimes. So how do we get folks to see us in 3D? I'm gonna take 2 seconds to explain like one particular way we sort of talk about a concealed story is like to kind of take it out of race or class at first, and then kind of interject some ways that people are marginalized afterwards. We talk about my family's Jamaican. I grew up in Jamaica. Anybody here Jamaican? Yes. Nobody, except for me. So my family's Jamaican. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I remember sometimes going to visit my family in Jamaica. You talk about snow, and they're like, "What are you speaking about? Like, I don't know what that element is. Please come again." And the way we kind of talk about it is like, if snow has impacted my life in such an important way, and I go to a particular place where they've never seen snow, sometimes they won't even acknowledge that it exists. And then let's say somebody acknowledges that it exists, but their only experience of it, and not real experience, is maybe seeing like really incredible Christmas movies or romantic comedies on TV where people just kind of make snow angels and it's awesome and they fall in love every time it snows. And so and so you try to say like, no, seriously, like one time it snowed so bad that they canceled school. And they're like, never, that doesn't happen. Or you say like, one time it snowed so bad that it was like covering the mailbox and we had to stay inside all day. And then my dad like hurt his back shoveling. And they're like, that doesn't happen. I don't know, you know? And you start talking about all these things that have happened to you with your experiences with snow, and even great things like, yeah, and there was this one time we didn't have a sled, so we made this thing and we slid down our street and it was like the most fun time in the world. And people are like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't get snow in that particular way. And then we even, you know, we extend this metaphor a little bit further, and then we say like, then people want you to tell them about yourself, and you find yourself censoring what you're saying because you realize they don't get that aspect. So you're like, yeah, and there's this one time, like me and my cousins, never mind, I'm not gonna tell you that part. So, and you start like, and that's what we mean by you can only see somebody in 3D, because you can only tell the stories about yourself that are unrelated to snow. And then you find somebody out of nowhere that like grew up maybe in Buffalo, New York too, and then you're just like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. And you have like your own snow group that you talk about secretly, you talk about snow with. And anyway, we kind of talk about with our young people, like, this is kind of when we just use terms that we never really think about what they mean. When you say like, man, that person gets it, that's what we mean. When you say like, oh, they get it. Like, they get everything that comes with the joys, the pains, the ingenuity, the creativity, the fun, all of it that comes with like having a life that's in some way shaped by our experience with snow. And that's just one way of being able to articulate what it means to be in a world where you do have concealed stories. It's like there's good and bad and all this experience that shapes who you are, your identity, how you talk to folks, that sometimes you can't share because people just can't see it. So another story we talk about is a resistance story, and that's huge because we have to say these are the times when folks who have been marginalized have resisted this marginalization, and whether or not they've been successful, they did it. And it's important for us to know that because this gives us hope that it's possible for us to do it. And then the last story is a constructed story, which comes from, this is our dream for a better school, this is our dream for a better community, this is our dream for a better world. And these are the things that we mainly cover in our summer program, our summer leadership intensive. And then we have 2 other programs, school year programs. I apologize if I'm talking too fast. I just want to make sure we don't run out of time here. So we have 2 other school year programs. One is our Rethink School Clubs, which are actually based in schools. It's an average of 8 to 10 rethinkers in each club, and what they do is, as a group of young people in that school, they go through a particular process of deconstructing what happens in the school, sort of dreaming about what a better school environment would be for them, and then collectively taking on one issue that they'd like to change, and coming up with recommendations. And what we try to do is make sure that the experiences of rethinkers, that we don't stay so internally focused. So once they figure out the issue that they want to address, then they go out and they do youth participatory action research. They talk to other youth, not only in their own school, but in other schools, and try to get a greater sense of what's going on in New Orleans, and they make their recommendations after that. They bring their recommendations to the administrators, the principals, the teachers, what have you. One thing that we talk about constantly is that we don't want to get in the space where we're always vilifying folks. So we talk about, like, when we look at the larger school system and the school structure, how are other folks in this system affected, but maybe in different ways. And one of the things we do is we sort of relate the experiences that teachers now find themselves in with the experiences that students are in. So you feel like you can't do anything, you feel sort of weighted down and sort of oppressed, and let's talk to some teachers and ask them some questions and find out the ways that they feel marginalized in their own school as well. And let's see if they'd be willing to be on our side as well when we're talking about issues of not just food justice, but of discipline policies. We find in New Orleans, there's a lot of schools that implement zero-tolerance discipline policies. So our rethinkers address the school-to-prison pipeline, but there are a great deal of teachers that are uncomfortable with those policies as well. And so we talk about making sure that we're not painting everyone who works at the school as just these evil folks that, like, just want to send young people to prison, and sort of seeing the ways in which they feel caught or sort of unable to address larger systems, and our young people try to see if these teachers would be willing to join some of their movements and coalitions to address these particular issues. And so we have our school-based clubs, and then one of the other programs we have for the year is our citywide action committees. And it's mainly so that anyone in New Orleans that wants to be a rethinker and wants to do youth organizing as a rethinker, they can join through one of our action committees. Those are more issue focused. All the issues were chosen by rethinkers at a particular point, and so they've grown. So one is our food justice and garden committee, where we not only look at issues of access to food in schools, but access to food in communities. But as I mentioned earlier, the historical understanding of all of this is important as well. So we talk about, especially in the South, experiences of folks of color, and also in New Orleans in terms of access to food, and how access to food has shaped sort of the stereotypical notions of what people eat. And so, like, now we have this idea, this identity and crisis in this idea that somehow people of color just don't know how to eat healthy food, which is not true. And a lot of that is related to access to healthy food. So everything we do comes back to this identity and sort of shaping identities and understanding historical narratives, and then breaking down issues from a critical point. And we talk about always analyzing the roots and the leaves of every issue. So food justice is one of our committees. Restorative justice is another one of our committees. We connect with Alliance for Educational Justice on a national scale, and also Dignity in Schools on a national scale with our Restorative Justice Committee. And our young people engage in, I find that's where if we talk about barriers, that's where there's the most tension. When we talk about food, often schools can, and legitimately they want to serve fresher food, but because there's a school food provider, it's easier for schools to take when we're talking about food justice in schools. When we talk about restorative justice, there's no like disciplines provider that they can say like, no, it's them, not us. So that's more sort of the tension that we find ourselves in sometimes when we try to call out a school, and we have to be able to say that we don't like this practice. We might like this school, or we might like you as a person, but this practice is a horrible practice. And rethinkers definitely do the research as to how the policies, the discipline policies, inordinately affect young black youth in New Orleans and the New Orleans population. And then our other, we have architecture, a group of rethinkers, especially from the beginning, wanted to say in the actual physical spaces and how they would be rebuilt when schools are being rebuilt. And now it's grown into really addressing sort of built environment issues. Transportation is a huge issue in New Orleans. And so young people really getting into the fray, talking about those things that affect not just the youth, but various communities sort of citywide. If I were going to address some barriers that we face, I already mentioned one. I'd say there's cultural norms of adultism, not just in New Orleans, but I think, you know, kind of worldwide, these cultural norms of adultism where you find folks who want to work with youth and they want to respect youth voice, but if there is ever a sacrifice that needs to be made, it will be made on the young person's behalf. And what I mean by that is like, you know, in good ways, folks say like, hey, we want some rethinkers to come here and we want to hear what rethinkers have to say. But if we can't do the meeting at 5 p.m. so that rethinkers can get there, we're still going to do it at 9 a.m. when they're in school, you know? So in terms of this sort of culture of adultism, sacrifices are expected to be made. And on the youth side, I think also there's a tendency to tokenize youth, even in our best. We find at Rethink, even with folks who don't intend to, there is a tendency sometimes to tokenize youth, so that is a barrier as well, especially sometimes as adult allies when we know we're kind of walking into a space, we're like, listen, it's important for youth voice to be heard, but we also need you to understand that they don't need to be tokenized. That's not what they need to do. One of the things that we do at Rethink is that we make sure the youth they make the decision as to whether or not they want to be a part of any kind of media campaign. We do press conferences twice a year. They decide whether or not they want to do the press conference, be in any kind of media campaign, speak in front of any audience. And then even when they do decide they want to do it, we do a really critical breakdown analysis of media in and of itself. And I joke around all the time with this, that like the only time I'll ever quote Shaquille O'Neal as like in terms of an intelligent individual, although I do like basketball and I like Shaq. Earlier in his career, Shaq's kind of he goofs around all the time in front of media. And earlier in his career, he was asked, why do you do that? And he said, listen, in anything I do, I'm a 7-foot black man that plays basketball. Anything I do, they're going to paint me as a clown. The most powerful decision I can make is to decide what kind of clown I want to be. And honestly, we talk to our young people about that, to say like, you're in 6th grade and you're young, and to some people you're really cute and what have you. And so in a larger scope of media, some people might tokenize you. So I think the most powerful decision you can make is, do you want to be tokenized, and how do you use it for your own good? And then we also talk about the power of telling our own stories. So we don't just allow like large media to tell our story as much as we do our own storytelling ourselves. But if we're going to do it, just make sure you know everything that comes with it, and then make the decision about how you want to use that to your own gain. But are we, I don't know how much time I have. I don't know who I'm supposed to be looking at.
When George stands up, that's when you know.
Yeah, so that's perfect because I was done anyway.
So,
Thank you.
thank you so much, Karen, Jose Joel, and Kimberly. We're going to have more time to talk to you and hear from you after our break. So I think maybe a 10-minute break, if we could, right now, and be back at 10 till the hour. That would be great. So thank you all very much, and come back with questions.